my name's Caitlin. I'm a holistic nutrition consultant, and today we have a great treat. We have Dr. Bryan Rade. He is from Canada, from Nova Scotia, and he is a naturopathic doctor, and he has a lot of things to say about his time that he tried the carnivore diet and how to transition off, and also his perspective on carnivore as a naturopathic doctor. So welcome, Dr. Bryan. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Caitlin.
So so you tried the carnivore diet. So how long did you do it? What got you into it? And then what happened after that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. And sorry, just before I get started, I'm a little self-conscious. I got a big gash on my face at kickboxing class last night, so please excuse my busted up visage over here. So yeah, I started the carnivore diet. I did full-blown carnivore diet for about 3 months, about 2.5 years ago, I guess, give or take. And yeah, I just wanted to give it a try. I, heard enough, kind of got sucked into the charming personality of Paul, like Dr. Paul Saladino, hearing him talk about this. And I had this one patient with Crohn's disease, like, for folks listening who don't know, it's just this, terrible, sometimes terrible, really severe inflammatory bowel condition. This patient had tried everything, like the conventional meds, couldn't tolerate them. They weren't really working. And then he wound up trying the carnivore diet kind of out of desperation. And he was like perfectly controlled on that. It was just amazing. But he was unfortunately stuck on the diet. He was kind of tired of it after a few years. But I was like, wow, like that's really compelling. And then I had a couple other patients where like, yeah, I'm feeling really good on this carnivore diet. I'd heard, some folks talking about it and just thought like, this is just nuts. Like you need veggies to be healthy. Like I'm, naturopathic doctors is built into our training. And I was like, well, I heard it, just seeing the results in my patients, like, well, I'm going to give this a try, see what it's like. Cause I kind of thought about prescribing it to some patients, but I generally try to work with things myself before I actually inflict them on my patients just to see what they're like, especially something like a dietary change. So I've done lots of crazy diets over time. So I decided to give it a go. And I was just, really blown away. Like within the first couple of weeks, were a little rough. Like I didn't really have any full blown, keto flu type thing. I'd already been kind of doing a modified ketogenic diet for quite a while leading up to that point. But, I had some like skin outbreaks. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, what is my body clearing, or what is this diet allowing my body to clear? Trying to remember now. I think, I had like really funky smelling body odor for like, a few days here and there. My wife's like, what are you trying to do to me here? And sorry, just clicking something that came up on my screen. But then started noticing like, oh, like my digestion was good, but it's like, man, like I just don't have any gas at all. Like, I'm not burping at all, not passing any bowel gas. Like that's, it wasn't a problem before, but it's like it's just gone now. Like what's that all about? And then, I maybe had like an extra 3 to 4 pounds on me. Like I'm a pretty trim guy, keep in pretty good shape, do a fair bit of activity. It's like, oh man, like just seeing my abs coming out more, which my wife was then, all on board for this, me being on this diet. I wasn't stinky anymore and looking fitter. Yeah, just started noticing I had like some couple little patches of dry skin that got better and went away. I was like, I've been trying stuff for years to try to get rid of that. So just saw some like little health improvements. I was already quite healthy to begin with, thankfully. But just noticed like, oh, I was feeling better, definitely not feeling worse. My energy was better. My cravings, like, in the evenings, like, oh, long day at work with the kids. It's like, oh, like, maybe I'm going to reach for some of those like healthy, keto friendly treats or, desserts or whatever it is. Like, I just couldn't care less about those things. So I just noticed a lot of positive changes. But then after maybe 3 months or so, I felt like, well, it's kind of becoming a little bit limiting, like my wife's making this delicious food for her and the kids and, paleo friendly, like, low grains, etc. stuff. But it's like, well, maybe I want to try some sweet potato, try some white rice, maybe have a little, like she makes this really good guacamole, try some of that. So just started kind of dabbling with some of those foods, bringing them back in. And for the most part, everything went well. The only thing I really found was I find if I consume more seed oils, like, if I'm say consuming more stereotypical like mayonnaise, for example, which is of course, unfortunately made with canola oil, or if I have some like tortilla chips or something, like the seed oils, I find like I feel a little bit off. I'll get like a little bit of dry skin coming back, but generally I find I on carnivorous foods, but I'm still, a good like probably 90% meat based, and it seems to work better for my personal lifestyle. It gives me a little more flexibility with my dietary choices. But that's kind of the how and why I made that transition. That's what I've been doing for the last probably couple of years, give or take.
So you still kind of, so you could probably say it was more kind of keto then, a little bit.
I I would say like I'm still predominantly carnivore. Like my yeah, but the majority like my lunches every day, for example, my staff members and colleagues here, they always make fun of me at my clinic because it's like, oh, I just have this like bowl of meat. I call it my meat, what do I call it? My meat trough, basically. So it's like just all meat for lunch. Dinner's mostly meat. Breakfast is typically meat and eggs, but I do complement it a bit. My wife found this amazing gluten-free sourdough bread recipe, so I do have some of that. Like I find that it kind of helps me to. I've been trying to put on some more muscle mass so I can try to keep up with the young guys at the kickboxing classes. Obviously, it's not working that well, but yeah, I'm getting a little more carb in there just to like kind of bulk up a bit more. But yeah, otherwise it's predominantly meat for my meals.
So like when you were thinking about getting, kind of incorporating more things, what was your criteria to like figure out which things to try and how long, did you try something before you, looked for symptoms and then like tried another thing? And how do you like introduce things?
Yeah, so what I did personally is akin to what I have recommended to my own patients for years and years. Kind of the way we learned it in naturopathic school, or at least how I learned it in naturopathic school, was bringing one food back in at a time. Consuming that for about 3 days in a row, and if by day four things seem to be okay, like the whatever symptoms were better, like whether it's like, oh, my headaches went away, or my energy's better, or my skin's cleared up, or I don't have itchiness, or whatever it is. Then if after like a 3-day trial everything was okay, like nothing was flared up, then we generally consider that to be a safe food. So I just basically did that, trying to just bring in one food at a time. And then in terms of the list of what to start with, again, just nod to Dr. Saladino. I think wonderful guy, and just yeah, really highly recommend listening to him, reading his material. He's got a great book out there as well. Yeah, kind of just picking some of those foods. So like I think I trying to remember what I actually started with now. It was a while ago, but yeah, like trying like avocado, for example, cucumber without the seeds, I think was one of the ones on there, like one of the earlier ones I tried. I brought white rice in relatively soon because just it was again kind of just to partake in some of the stuff that my family was eating at meals as well. So yeah, I brought that in, tried some squash, which was fine. So like it was all okay when I brought it in. But
One of the
those are,
low toxin plants that he
yeah,
recommends. Yeah.
much.
I
Yep.
mean, I like that. I like that he gave some, differentiation between some of the ones because it's all just like it's all bad, it's like that doesn't help because like you
Mhm.
said, people don't necessarily want to stay on this forever. And knowing like I do choose to stay carnivore, 99%, but if knowing I could eat something like a cucumber or something and that would, or go for sushi or something like that and have just a little bit of variety, then knowing which foods are going to be less reactive than others is very helpful. Now, I'm not a big fan of the honey thing, but other than that, he's pretty smart. Um,
So yeah,
and
the honey thing, like I get a little hung up on that too because like a lot of my patients are dealing with conditions like Sibo or yeast overgrowth or things like that, and I don't like I'm not a disciple of the low FODMAP diet like fulminantly, but I've certainly found that some folks definitely react more to higher FODMAP foods. Like the thing that yeah, just like honey, like it's high FODMAP, so like that's yeah, I have a hard time getting my head wrapped around that one too. I find my patients tend to do better like with pure maple syrup over honey. Some of them are fine with both, some are fine with neither. But yeah, if someone needs a sweetener in there and they don't want to go for like the erythritol or xylitol or stevia or something like that, then which of course are high FODMAP as well. But yeah, I find that syrup seems to be a bit better. So, anyways, agree to disagree on the honey. It's all good.
yeah, um, yeah, it has a lot of other good contributions.
Oh.
And I got really in the weeds there for a while. Like I was following SCD and all that stuff. And it was just like, it was so overwhelming. Like, oh, I can't have onions and and
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
it's like, and one time, and one time I did AIP for a long time. I did it for like 8 weeks and I found that to be like almost as isolating as COVID. It was like, this is horrible. Like, I
Yep.
can't even go to a restaurant like with a friend. Like, I met a friend in the park and we had a picnic. This was years before, that
Mhm.
was a thing that people
Hmm.
It was like just because we were both doing AIP, that's why so and I found that that was more detrimental to my health than, now now on carnivores, like I can go to eat at a restaurant and maybe there's some seed oils on the grill or whatever, but I don't really care. And like,
Hmm.
because I don't go to the restaurant all the time, but like I know I can get a big hunk of steak and I'm okay and I'm full and I don't have to worry about it. It's just like
Yeah.
so much easier. I don't know, just for me, I don't want to think about every single little thing. Is it a fructan or whatever? Like it's just like so
Absolutely.
overwhelming, and I was like, some people were like, oh well, flax seeds are not allowed on SCD. And I was just like, I can't do that. I can't take this. It's
It's too
freaking,
much. It's too
yeah.
complicated and convoluted.
Yeah, and
And
I also
like
was
the
on
L.
GAPS for a long time. And
Oh,
that's
sure.
those people are nuts. I mean,
It's so convoluted, and like the elephant in the room for me is that like I just, again, like as a clinician, I've been practicing for 14 years. I've worked with thousands and thousands of patients, and like, some folks will come in and say, yeah, I'm doing low FODMAP and I'm great, or I'm doing GAPS, I'm great, I'm doing SCD, I'm great. Then I had, many more patients who are like, yeah, I'm doing low FODMAPs and it's helping, but like I'm still bloated. It's like, well, there's obviously more to it than this. Like it's not perfect. So like dancing around these like, no rhyme or reason behind them diets. Like, I mean, there's the rhyme or reason, but it's not intuitive. It's not like, oh, I'm just cutting it like all, brassicas or something like that. It's like, no, it's like this one's fine, but that one's not. Like it's, yeah, just so it's like you got to follow the results. And I personally view the carnivore diet as being like kind of the ultimate like hypoallergenic diet. Like, there's the low oxalate diet, low histamine diet, low salicylate diet, low lectin diet. It's like the carnivore diet. And like I've had patients come in lamenting, like, I can't do all the diets. Like, yes, you can. It's called the carnivore diet. Like it's low in every plant toxin you can think of. So it's like,
yeah,
hey,
it's
it's like
easier.
what's that? Sorry?
I think it's just so much easier for your
It is.
mental
It
health.
is.
Just
Yep.
easier. I mean, I love the idea of GAPS. I mean, listened to her at the Weston A. Price convention. Like I love that whole idea of, and I mean, I've heard people doing no, I don't know what they call it, no plant GAPS or something, and I was like, oh,
Oh,
there
okay.
we go. Like that
There we
sounds
go. Hmm.
so I just saw somebody doing that the other day. I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Because I loved all the broth but
Yeah.
even fermented foods were just like, oh, to me, like, I mean, if I could drink kombucha till it's going, yeah, it's like, okay, now I've had 150 grams of sugar today. What's
It's so
what's
sugary.
next? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I was wondering about, like, you had said you had a guy on Crohn's, and like, what would you tell him? He did carnivore, he loved it, but then, he's getting sick of it. Like, what would you tell him?
Yeah, well, I mean, I mean, I could speak to his particular case. It was a little bit more nuanced. But are you asking kind of just more in general, like someone's
Like, I
on.
mean, he wanted like somebody who's just doing it, it's helping them, but they're sick of it. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, my general advice for my patients is like, okay, the way I kind of initially presented is like, okay, let's try this carnivore diet. And sometimes they're on board, like, oh, I've heard enough podcasts about it. They're good to go. They just want some guidance. And then sometimes they're like, you're crazy. Like, I don't want to do this. So it kind of depends on how enthusiastic they are going into it. But generally, if, I usually say to them, let's try this diet for maybe like, 2 to 4 weeks. Let's aim for four, but let's at least try to get two in there. I usually recommend that they phase into it unless they're more of like an all or nothing kind of person. That's just the way my rationale works, and it seems to be good for my patients. And then, try the diet and let's see how you're feeling. And if we're seeing clinical improvements, then as soon as humanly possible, let's start phasing some other foods back in. And sometimes we check in at that 4 week mark and they're like, I'm feeling really good. Great. Are you okay to stick with the diet a bit longer, or are you feeling really antsy? Or are you feeling like you're really missing foods? It's like 50-50. 50% of the time it's like, this diet's so easy, I'm not craving anything anymore. I'm just like, meat's just so satisfying. Like it's just, great. And they're good to like keep going for a bit longer. And sometimes they're like, I'm for social pressures, or they're just really craving this or that. They're like, I want to bring some other foods in. So as soon as possible, we just start phasing the foods back in and see how they do. With some patients, it's really tough to find something that they tolerate well. Or with some patients, we're working on other things concomitantly. We've done, say, lab testing, and we found that they have Sibo, or large intestine bacterial overgrowth, or yeast overgrowth, or there's this condition that's kind of been a little bit more popularized lately because it's more folks are talking about it. I've been seeing a lot of it in my practice, practice called exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, or EPI for short. Like oftentimes with my patients, they tend to be really quite sick. Like I specialize and treat, or my practice heavily focuses on folks with complex chronic illnesses. So there's usually more things going on that are a bit more complicated. But once we see that there's good headway with the diet, we'll usually start phasing the foods back in as long as they're tolerated, and hopefully dealing with any of the comorbidities that might stand in the way of them, getting a more robust diet in place. But some of them are really happy to just stick with like, yeah, I've got my meat and I'm eating a few veggies that I like, just to keep it a little bit fresh, and they're happy with that. And that's where I'm at. I'm happy with my diet. I don't want to be eating, tons of non-meat. So that's my general approach.
Yeah, that's another question I was going to say is just like, what do you find like there's limitations? I mean, I think there's this idea in carnivore communities, like just carnivore harder, and it's like, well, but there's got to be something like, I know for me, like I probably have some other thing that's, because my digestion is not perfect. It still struggles, and it got better, but then after I got pregnant and everything, it kind of went backwards again. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like, I know there's some stuff, and I have a doctor, and she's given me a whole bunch of tests to take home, and I haven't gotten around to sending them in, but what do you find are kind of the common underlying things? I mean, now, parasites are really big and popular that, everybody's showing them in the toilet. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to see that.
Really, really appetizing. Yep.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, like, I see quite a lot of Sibo, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, for folks that aren't familiar with that acronym. So that comes up quite a bit. So like one of patients where they're like, oh, I'm doing so much better on the carnivore diet, but I'm still not 100% asymptomatic. I'm still getting some bloating, or I'm good on carnivore, but as soon as I bring some non-carnivorous food in, then I'm flaring. Like the approach I usually work with my patients, and it depends on their goals and finances and all these different things, but ideally, we do some intestinal microbiome testing to see what's going on. So we'll run something called the lactulose breath test to assess for SIBO. We'll typically run a stool test to see if there's any bacterial overgrowth in the large intestine, what the probiotic levels look like. Is there any yeast overgrowth? And then if ideally we'll screen for this exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, this EPI condition, which is basically where the pancreas is either not producing enough enzymes in the first place, or the enzymes are there, but they're not getting excreted properly. Oftentimes that can be related to SIBO. Maybe we'll do a stomach acid test to see what's, maybe there's low stomach acid, or maybe the person's just under a lot of stress. They're never really fully getting into that rest and digest mode. And so we need to work on, they need to try to work on work-life balance, which is sometimes easier said than done when there's kids and jobs and bills and all these things to worry about. But those are some of the main things that I see coming up. And then in many of those cases, if they're having a hard time getting, phasing non-carnivorous foods into back into their diet, or they're better on carnivore, but not 100% better with digestive symptoms, then almost always we'll find that there's some kind of microbial overgrowth, EPI, something like that. So we'll address that. Ideally, get them to the point where they're asymptomatic, and then start phasing the foods back in, and it usually goes a lot smoother. There are tricky cases out there that despite our best efforts, sometimes we're like just we're struggling. But I'd say a good 90% of cases, like, we can sleuth it out. And I always ask the question, like, why does a person seem to need to go on carnivore? Like, what is it that with their either immune system dysfunction or gut microbiome, or like what is it that those plant foods are feeding or perpetuating? Do they have oxalate sensitivities? Like, do they have a histamine intolerance thing? Like, so we try to sleuth it out, because I'm just not really satisfied with, like, oh, like, if a patient's happy, I'm happy. But generally it's like, like, why are you stuck on this diet? Like, why do you need to be kind of like, why can't you spread your wings a little bit more? And if a patient's happy, we just let it be. But if they're like, yeah, I'd like to explore that further, then we'll do that type of testing and explore things further.
That's amazing. I mean, I think that we have to be open. I mean, I think whatever, sphere you're in, like your niche or whatever, like, I mean, I used to be more in the paleo sphere and the AIP and all that stuff. And you can get really, like, it can be like an echo chamber, and you don't hear
Mm-hmm.
that there's other options. And so it's really good to hear from you, Dr. Bryan. And so tell us a little bit more. Do you work with people in the States, or is it only like people with the Canadian, do they cover that in your healthcare system, or are you cash only?
Yeah, we have a really different healthcare here. So yeah, like whenever I hear my American colleagues talking about like cash only practice, like yeah, that's what it's anything that's not like in the standard medical system. It's all cash only. There's a
Right.
little bit of like private insurance that folks might have through their workplaces or whatnot, but we don't have the same kind of insurance system as we have a socialized healthcare system here.
Yeah.
But in terms of working with folks in the States, I work with lots of folks in the States. I have over the course of time. I currently work with a number of folks in the States. So if folks are interested in working with me, they can just contact me. And yeah, happy to share that contact info or however
Yeah,
you
go
do
ahead.
that in
Tell
show
us
notes or
where
whatnot.
all your
Sure.
channels and everything.
Sure. Yeah. So my website is eastcoastnaturopathic.com, just the way that it sounds. My on Instagram, I'm Dr. Bryan Rade, ND. And then I have a YouTube channel, which is Halifax Naturopathic Doctor. And then I have my own podcast as well, which you were just a guest on my podcast. So thanks for that, Caitlin. It was a lovely chat. It's called the Overcoming Chronic Illness Podcast. And on any of those platforms, you can just kind of look at my bio or whatnot. You can find the links to my website and whatnot, or just look at my name, Bryan Rade, ND. And I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah, I'll link to your Instagram down below so people can DM you if they have any questions.
Great.
And it was really great talking with you. And please leave your comment down below if you, had any, did you try any of these diets or did you have any of these conditions we talked about today? It would really help us out if you join the conversation down in the comments and share this with a friend who might be struggling. Maybe they want to go off the carnivore diet. Maybe they want to add some more foods. Maybe they just want to hear a great chat. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.